speak directly into the microphone and so we can be heard, because she could not hear us on the video of the last meeting, okay? And that brings us to determining if we have a quorum, which it appears we have everyone present, correct? Correct. And so we move now to the approval of the agenda and the consent items. And let's see.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion by Director Landsberg, seconded by Director Chapman, to approve the agenda and the consent items. And what I'm trying to do, I presume the consent items are items 4 through 8.
Just the approval of the minutes.
Just the minutes? Oh, okay. So is there any public comment on the minutes? There being none, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. That moves us on then to item 3, which is a presentation on healthy rivers and landscapes from Thad Bettner, Executive Director of the Sacramento River Settlement Contractors. Thad, are you here? Oh, there you are, Thad. Well, welcome to our very formal meeting. Glad to have you.
Sure, thanks for having me.
The presentation that will be on the screen is also in your packets in order as item 3, in case you wanted to follow along that way.
Thank you.
All right, good to go? All right, well, thanks for the opportunity to speak to you this morning, or this afternoon, I guess, and thanks for Tim for setting this up. A little bit about me. So my name is Thad Bettner. I'm the Executive Director for the Sacramento River Settlement Contractors. And currently, I'm working for the contractors under a contract basis. So actually, I'm a registered engineer. I have my own small company, but at least for this year, and working with the settlement contractors, I'm just doing that on a contract basis for this year, and then we're seeing how things go from there. So,
Gentlemen, I've got this whole folder full of proof that your city council, your city manager, your Woodland PD has covered up perfectly.
You are out of order, sir. Please take a seat. Please take a seat.
First Amendment. The city's been informed.
You are out of order. You are out of order.
You violated my First Amendment rights.
I'm asking you to sit down and
You have not been informed that your employees and your business are full of shit. Would you gentlemen like to hear a story? Sure you would.
all right. Please proceed, Thad.
All right.
I apologize for the interruption.
no problem at all. So we,
For affecting my First Amendment rights.
We're going.
Apologize for a city government.
We're going to call.
Denying my First Amendment. Call them. I would love to get PD here. I would love to be charged and finally get in front of a judge.
Please call the police.
Call Lieutenant Daniels. I'll wait out front for the PD.
Would you like to leave your name for the record?
I left my name with the manager's staff.
Thank you.
You don't get to take a person's kid away from them for political reasons.
This is a water board, sir.
Yeah, right. And I'm a fucking member of the community who's a proud boy. Don't shush me. Who's a proud boy. And my daughter hasn't heard my voice in 2 years because you let your fucking PD lie.
Well, would you like to continue, Thad?
yeah, sure. So I'll talk about water just to keep things from a different perspective. So I'm sure Tim's been letting you know a little bit of some of the things that we've been dealing with as a group of Sacramento River Settlement Contractors. And the Davis Woodland project you are one of our contractors in the group. So appreciate you being part of our group. And so we'll talk a little bit about the contractor group, and then really want to talk about 2 activities that are currently going on that will be affecting our collective water supply. And we're trying to do what we can to plan for that, mitigate any risk to the extent we can, but also, for at least the water users, including the Davis Woodland project, make sure we're positioned as best we can to address the next 8 to 15 years of water actions that are happening state and federal perspective. So can we go to the next slide? So a little bit about our contractor corporation, and I'm sure Tim's told you a little bit about at least your contract as it relates to the Davis Woodland project, but the Sacramento River Settlement Contractors have existed for a long time, at least as individual water right holders and contract holders with the Bureau of Reclamation. Speaking of just our nonprofit corporation, and that's who I'm here on behalf of. So we formed the nonprofit corporation in 2016, and what we saw coming out of the drought in 2014 and 15 was that as a group of contractors, we worked very closely together to manage flows on the Sacramento River, manage our diversions, trying to share diversion capacity because we were limited in those years by the amount of water that could have been released out of Shasta Reservoir. There was a need in those years to protect cold water temperatures in the reservoir for winter run salmon that spawn below Shasta, and so we worked out kind of an operational agreement with the Bureau of Reclamation, State of California, State Water Resources Control Board to operate Shasta, but also ensure that we could get water to divert for that year. And that required just a lot of coordination. At the same time, we had a lot of our entities that were also going out and actually doing restoration projects in the river to benefit salmon and other species. And so kind of all these actions working together, and we said, well, we should really formalize how we're working together versus kind of doing this, sort of in good favor and good merit to one another. So that was kind of the reason we formed the corporation in 2016. We looked at different ways to form it. There's joint powers agreements. There's different ways you can organize. Like I believe your entity is a joint powers agreement. Is that right, Tim? Is that how you guys are set up? So that could have been one way, but we had private. Some of our entities, settlement contractors, are actually private. Some of them are single landowners. And in order to be able to accommodate everybody into the group, really what fit best was a nonprofit corporation. So that's what we formed. So it's a 501c6 is how we're formed. So can we file tax returns? We're nonprofit, et cetera. But it was just a way we could all get organized. There's over 130 contractors that are settlement contractors. We have about 40% that are actually members of the corporation, so we're trying to continue to get the rest of them to be participants. There's about 2.1 million acre feet of water, if you total up all those contracts that are part of the settlement contractor group. And one of our primary purposes is to protect and preserve our members' water rights and contract supply. And then we do have a website where we're starting to post a lot of things. We also use the website to host a lot of documents and things like that are available to members. So our current activities, and interestingly enough, when we formed the corporation, we also put together bylaws that talked about, hey, here are the things that we really want to focus on for the members, on behalf of the members. And really the activities here are really follow and emulate what we have in the bylaws. So the first one is to protect the long-term Central Valley project operations. So we are settlement contractors. That contract is with the Bureau of Reclamation. So ensuring that the contract stays in place is really important. And every few years, which is happening right now, the Bureau has to go through a process where they complete a consultation with the federal fishery agencies to ensure that the project can continue to operate. So that's very important. It's a high priority. Agreements to support healthy rivers and landscapes. That's kind of these activities that relate to some of the Delta solutions. Those have been called in the past voluntary agreements, but that's really what this issue speaks to. Coordination flows and diversions on the Sacramento River. Again, focusing kind of our annual supplies. So this year we focused on 2024 operations, what Shasta looked like, what our diversion patterns were going to be to ensure all the contractors had adequate water supply and a diversion pattern they needed. Scientific research and activities to improve Sac River management, and this really looks at science around what do fish need. Our position, I think, as water users is as the fishery goes, so does our water supply. So if the fish aren't doing well, likely our water supply won't be either. So investing in science and really better understanding the needs of fish is going to be vital to making sure we have a reliable water supply going forward. So we spend a lot of our time and money on investing in that science research on the river. implementing salmon projects. Again, we have a lot of entities doing that. I think right now we have almost $40 million worth of projects that are in one state or another that are being constructed up and down the river. Coordinating with Northern California Water Association on communications and special projects. So again, making sure that we're keeping the water community within the valley informed of what we're doing, and then continued outreach to our settlement contractor members and contractors is important. So doing this meeting with you, I've done about 20 other meetings with other entities of your size and larger, and then starting to reach out to some of those single landowners who are also contractors with the Bureau. So the first big item we really want to talk about is this biological opinion consultation, and this really relates to, again, the operation of the Central Valley Project, and our focus really is going to be on what's happening at Shasta Reservoir. So a little bit of history. Most of us signed contracts back in 2006, and those contracts were originally signed in 1964. There were original settlement contracts with the Bureau of Reclamation, and those contracts were signed as a result of the Sacramento River water users objecting to the operation of Shasta Reservoir. The Bureau went in during the 30s, and they started building Shasta Reservoir. They had no permits, they got no approvals, they just started building it. And over the water users' concerns of that was going to impact water users, that litigation went on for a while. There were studies that were done in the 50s to identify water supply, and then in 1964, essentially the contracts were signed to settle the issue between the water users and the Bureau of Reclamation, and that's why we call them settlement contracts. So those were signed in 1964. There were 40-year contracts. They came up for renewal, and then most of them were re-signed in 2006. Shortly thereafter, we have a group of environmental litigants who sued on our contracts. They also sued on the Central Valley operations of Central Valley Project. And in one form or another, that litigation's been going on and still goes on today. So probably as a group, we're spending $3, $4, $5 million a year defending our contracts through that litigation, which is important. And obviously, we're trying to look at ways to resolve the litigation. I don't think any of us want to be in litigation. It's a place that, again, some of the environmental plaintiffs are putting us in, but we want to try and resolve it to the extent we can. In 2019, another round of litigation and opposition were filed on biological opinions back then. A lot of that kind of got caught up in the two administrations, the Trump administration, the Newsom administration, and some of those politics led to more litigation and the need to do new biological opinions. And one thing that changed in 2019 was the state of California actually became a litigant against the federal government as it related to operations of the project and biological opinion. That had never happened before, so that also kind of changed the dynamic. So in 2021, the Bureau agreed to reinitiate on doing a new consultation for the Central Valley Project. And then since that date, we also have been operating on an annual basis under what we call the interim operations plans. And those are plans that are developed annually and that the court has to approve every year. So for any of us to get our water in a given year, the last several years, a court has been basically running the project versus the Bureau of Reclamation. So it's been a little bit of a challenge dealing with those annual operations plans. And then feel free to stop me anytime as we're going. I know it's probably fire hose right now, but if you have a specific question, please feel free to ask anytime. So the process that we're in is consultation. There's NEPA and an ESA process. So NEPA is the National Environmental Policy Act. ESA is the Endangered Species Act. You have to go through both of those federal processes and comply with them to come up with biological opinions. So here's the different paths, different things that need to get done. The star kind of indicates where we're at, and we're probably, if you look at that star, it's probably shifted over another 4 or 5 inches on the screen, and we're kind of getting close to getting these biological opinions done. And once those biological opinions are done, the fishery agencies pretty much tell the Bureau of Reclamation how they need to operate the Central Valley project. And then from that, we kind of can figure out, well, what does that mean to how we would operate, and what does that mean to our collective water supply? So we're months away of kind of seeing what the fishery agencies are going to put in those biological opinions. And here's as it relates to BIOPS, here's kind of just a calendar of dates. If you look about the third line down, draft BIOP, you can see June 28th, which is next week. We should see a draft biological opinion out of the FWS, is the Fish and Wildlife Service. They're primarily tasked with ensuring the protection of more of the pelagic species in the Delta, so Delta smelt, longfin smelt, and others. So they are likely going to have their draft BIOP that we can see next week. And then the one that we really want to see is the one to the left, the NMFS, which is National Marine Fishery Service. They are in charge, and they're in the Department of Commerce. They're charged with protecting salmonids primarily, since it's an interstate issue, it's under commerce. So they're looking to have their draft BIOP out the end of July. And that will really look at what's happening for us. It's what's happening up at Shasta Reservoir, and what does that mean to water supply that gets released out of Shasta that then we all divert and use. Next slide. So this new BIOP, what's in it? What do we know what's in it? And we've actually been talking with the fishery agencies going into the development of their biological opinion. So I would say the good thing is we've been having some input on the front end of it. So I think the hope is we know what comes out the back end of it. Versus previous years, we've kind of just been waiting to see what they put out there, and then we kind of go through a shock and awe type review of, well, how bad is this? So we've been providing input into it, and again, that input means that we'll be affected, but it's on our own terms. So in the new BIOP, right now, they are proposing there would be more conservative operations at Shasta Reservoir. That means that they would hold the Shasta levels higher to help prepare against future drought, but also help protect temperature for winter run salmonid. And the only way you can increase water in Shasta is you gotta decrease releases out of it. And if you decrease releases out of it, that means somebody's getting less water. And if somebody's getting less water, that means their water supply is being reduced. And so right now, Reclamation's looking at accommodating those shortage targets primarily through the reduction of water supply to water users. In a lot of cases, a lot of those contracts have provisions where Reclamation can take that down to zero. It actually says that in the contract. So Reclamation's looking at, for the most cases, they can do that, and that would meet those Shasta storage targets. But in the driest of dry years, like we experienced in a 2014 year, a 2022 year, you can't take everybody to zero and still get through the season. So they have made an ask of us collectively as water users. That is, one of the primary items that we'll be talking about today. The second bullet, as I mentioned, there's been engagement across a lot of state and federal agencies. So as we've kind of been putting this together, we've been making sure that, as I said earlier, the state of California was a litigant in this process. So making sure that the state of California is also supportive and on board of this approach is really important, and they have been. So we're kind of getting to this point where, we're trying to get to some sort of a pre-agreement, if you can call it that, to make sure we understand what the BIOP will actually look like. So the third bullet down talks about, the Bureau. USBR is a U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. SRSC is us, the Sac River Settlement Contractors. So we've been working on an agreement that would really facilitate these proposed operations. And the key points are, one, it would establish a water reduction program. So we are looking at the contractors as a whole in a critical year. In that critical year, New critical year would have specific criteria around it. We would be reduced by another 25%. So our current provisions in the contract say that reclamation can reduce us to 75%. There's also other provisions that say that reclamation can't be held liable if they shortish. They can't be held liable for other things, and that's why we received a 20% water supply in 2022, or 18% supply in 2022. So there wasn't enough water in 2022 to divert to us. There wasn't any water, so they said they can only divert 18 because that was really all the wet water that was available. So in this new program, we're talking about an additional 25% reduction, so the max reduction would be down to 50%. Reclamation has agreed to provide compensation for that. So right now they're looking to provide the settlement contractor group roughly $250 million. And that money would be available to the settlement contractors to use for infrastructure and other purposes. The third sub-bullet, obviously there's a lot of risk that if we don't reach this negotiated resolution. We've talked about this deal with the fishery agencies, but again, there is possibility if we didn't have this deal in place, the fishery agencies could come out with even more strict criteria on the operations of Shasta Reservoir. So maybe we could see another 18% year in the future. So again, trying to mitigate this risk and making sure we have certainty is huge important to us as a group of water users. We're focusing on getting materials out. We're doing a lot of outreach right now, this spring, summer. We've had legal counsel engaged in a lot of the conversations to ensure the agreements that we put in place are protective for the contractor group. And then ultimately, we need to go out to all the settlement contractors and really, ensure they're informed of what's going on. And so as we get into signing this agreement, if we're going to do that later this year, making sure that everybody's on board to move forward with the agreement.
Thad, I notice you're about halfway through your slides. Could you perhaps get more to a summary nature of the remaining of part of your remarks?
I can, for sure.
So we can get to our rest of our agenda. Thank
you. You betcha. All right, so let's move quicker then. All right, so the quick terms are, as I mentioned, there is funding for this action through the reclamation. We're talking about 2 phases of the project. There'd be the first 10 years where we'd see this additional 25% reduction, and then after that, there'd be about a 5% reduction. Our existing contracts would remain in place. We'd get take diversion on all our facilities. So actually diverting the water and being protective of the species is important. We get that. And then the other thing is we would be involved in all the operational decision making as it relates to the Central Valley project. And then last is we've talked to the agencies about putting together a winter run salmon action plan. Again, all of these actions, this water supply reduction is to further protect fish. We believe there's other actions that need to be done to protect fish. Just taking water from water users isn't going to get it done. So we've developed a winter run action plan that has 6 different key actions that we'll focus on. Next slide. And this kind of summarizes what I said about kind of the agreement, what's in the agreement, et cetera, but don't need to get into the specific details. And so this kind of highlights just really, again, in this year type, this critical year type, where we'd have this additional 50% reduction would happen in about 7% of the years. And we've tied that to drought. In other words, a specific inflow target into Shasta Reservoir would not have to be met in order for this trigger to happen. And again, as we've done the modeling, it would happen about 7 out of 100 years. So it's possible under this 10-year term we've talked about, it may never happen. Or it may happen 1 or 2 times. It's just hard to tell. Next slide. And then as it relates to Winter Run Action Plan, here's all the high-level priorities. You have the slide in front of you. You can take a look at that at your own leisure. So that kind of sums up our kind of conversation around this reinitiation of consultation and operations at Shasta Reservoir. Is there any questions? Because now we're going to kind of shift to talk about a little bit kind of what's happening in the Delta and kind of another program that we're also working on.
Questions, colleagues? Proceed.
All right. So state initiative. You all have heard about the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta, I'm guessing. So we're in the midst of some big decisions happening in the Delta that are going to have some potentially significant consequences depending on how they go. And so this involves the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. And this really manages how water is managed in the Delta, how much water comes into it, how much stays in it, how much keeps flowing out the Golden Gate Bridge. The last plan that the board worked on or completed was in 2006. And a lot of those discussions started back in 1995. So it actually took almost 10 years for the state board to go through a process where it finished its plan. They're also, as part of that plan, supposed to do triennial updates every 3 years. They're supposed to provide a report on how they're doing, what's happening, everything. Since 2006, they've not completed a single one of those triennial reports. So again, just a bit of a disappointment that they haven't really been doing what they're supposed to do. And then the other thing that's supposed to happen as part of that plan is they're supposed to.
Could we charge them $10,000 a day?
Yeah, right.
Don't they do that to us if we
Yeah.
do what they tell us?
That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Right. A reverse fine structure is what we need. And as part of that plan, they're supposed to balance beneficial uses. So uses for the environment, for the fishery, for water users, et cetera. We have, so that's kind of the left block. The center block is that there's been really 3 phases of updates that the board's working on. Phase 1 is on the San Joaquin River. So that's kind of everything on the southern part of the Delta upstream into the San Joaquin River tributaries. They completed all that work in 2018. For that, they identified a 40% unimpaired flow approach. So they basically said 40% needs to stay in the river, and then 60% can be used for other purposes. Actually, there was a lot of litigation around that, and only about, I think, 2 or 3 months ago, a judge finally ruled on that litigation, so roughly 6 years later. And it basically said the board can move forward with its plan for the San Joaquin. Phase 2 involves the Sacramento River and Delta, so that's all of us. And right now, they are proposing a minimum of a 55% unimpaired flow number on us. So 55% of the water in the Sacramento River and its tributaries would have to stay in the river, and 45% of it could be diverted and used. So that's kind of what they're talking about. And if you look at the far right, again, under that unimpaired flow approach, really it's a flow-only proposal. They've really not looked at habitat or other adaptive management type approaches. Some of the work that our folks have done estimates that it could take over 2 million acre feet of water away from water users to meet that new flow target. And that likely, there could be a lot of litigation as it would essentially just adjudicate the entire watershed. And that would take a long time to go through. So the next slide. So kind of as an alternative to all this, we looked at, said, well, what we would rather do is we put together several years ago a voluntary agreement. And it was more about a voluntary approach to where water users would give up water. We'd also commit to funding, develop a funding stream. We'd also do a bunch of habitat projects. And through the combination of those activities, we looked at saying this would be better for fish and for water users. Provide certainty to the environment. It would provide certainty to diverters, to communities, to urbans like you. So that's really what our goal has been. So and this is good to go to the next slide, actually. I think it's better. So when, again, you look at the water supply effect between the two programs, the kind of reddish purple color, this is 55% unimpaired. You can look at the different year types and see what type of impact would occur in terms of a water reduction to water users. And this would be in the Sacramento Valley. So it'd be a huge input or a huge effect. Whereas the blue would be kind of what we've been saying we'd put on the table as it relates to water to meet the Healthy Rivers alternative, again, with almost 50,000 acres of new habitat. So again, we think through water, providing water and habitat would be a much better approach to improving the fishery. Next slide. So the other thing we want to do is really look at, well, what does this mean to water users? So if you look at just kind of an average type year, the baseline would be our current level of diversions, and the unimpaired flow, the 55% IUF, that's unimpaired flow, that would be the reduction in diversions that we would potentially see. Again, we just modeled their alternative. They may implement it differently, but based on our modeling, you can see that through the summer, we would see between a 20 and 32% reduction. So basically a third of our water would be unavailable for diversion in those months. So for you folks, your diversion pattern may look a little bit different, but if you look at, a lot of the ag-based diversions, not having water through the summer months would be a significant impact. So again, we just feel like this isn't the right approach, and again, you don't see the benefit for fish for doing this. Next slide. So
This is an agricultural county, as you note that.
Yeah.
So we're certainly concerned about water for our farmers, just as we are for our municipal users. Thank
sure,
you.
appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. So again, kind of like on this watershed-wide approach, as we look at the healthy rivers and landscapes, really our focus is on kind of the upper left, really focuses on providing regulatory certainty and water supply and reliability. We believe that's critical. You need to know what you can work with, and that's vital. For environmental flows and habitat, if you put this whole program together, we're talking about over 800,000 acre-feet of water would be available in stream. It would also be new water that would be going out as delta outflow. So this would be water that would make its way down the rivers, out to Golden Gate Bridge, which again would meet some of the fishery needs as well. And about 45,000 acre-feet of habitat, food, and production would be part of that program. We're looking at over $3 billion would be invested from state, federal, and public water users. So as we've gone through this program, we're basically looking at self-assessing ourselves to pay for part of this program, and that would be funding that would be used for all those different purposes. And then obviously we have a lot of state, federal water agencies. We're starting to reach out to tribes more and environmental NGOs to make sure they'll want to participate in the program as well. So there is kind of an ask, again, for us as a contractor group to provide water into this program. So we've really looked at our water portfolio, the needs within our settlement contractor group, and what we came up with was providing about 100,000 acre-feet of water that would go into this Healthy Rivers and Landscapes program. So the previous slide on impacts, we divert, like I said, about 2 million acre-feet total. A 30% reduction of that would be over 600,000 acre-feet of water reduction to all the contractors. So we've said here 600 is not doable, obviously. So we said what number we could come up with would be about 100,000 acre-feet. And that water would be available in the above normal, below normal, and dry years. So kind of 3 out of the 5 year types is when water would be available. Communities, agencies could use groundwater to provide some of that water. Some of the districts may just do a fallowing program where they'll take some land out of production in order to get to this number. But that would be the number that would come out of our group as a whole. We've put together a process where we're starting to talk to all the members about how would we share in terms of providing that shortage or the 100,000 acre-feet. Historically, we've done things on a pro rata basis by contract amount, so everybody would basically put in their proportionate amount of their contract, or that's what they agreed to reduce their reduction by as part of that 100,000 acre-feet. But all this water would be compensated, so it wouldn't just be your flat out giving up water or having the water taken away from you, as would be happening under the unimpaired flow approach by the State Water Resources Control Board. But we really put a program together where there'd be compensation for this water. So if you're giving up water, you'd be paid for that, and you could use that money for other purposes, invest in other infrastructure, et cetera, to try and mitigate that shortage impact. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we would have a huge habitat component where we'd be doing in-river habitat and floodplain
2
habitat.
minutes, Chad.
Okay, we're good. We're about there. So last slide. So this is the last slide we'll stop at. So you put the two programs together, the biological, what's happening in the biological opinions, and then what's happening under this Healthy Rivers and Landscapes program. You're going to see that for us as a contractor group, impacts in different years. So in a wet year, so there's 5-year types. There's you see going across. So in a wet year, no action, no impact, plenty of water. An above normal, below normal, and dry year, again, we'd provide 100,000 acre feet into the Healthy Rivers and Agreement program, and that would address our obligation under the Bay Delta Plan. We'd have no other obligation by the state board to provide flows into the Delta. And that water in those 3-year types would be paid for. So again, our community, our water users get paid for those water year types. We go into a couple critical years, there's really, these are, the 2 critical years are based on an inflow into Shasta. In the critical non-program year, that would be a year where we'd have 3.2 million acre feet flows in, or less flows into Shasta, but more than 2.5 million acre feet. And that year we would receive 75%. So our contract would exist like it always has. And then we have this critical year program where, again, we'd have a inflow that'd be less than 2.5 million acre feet, and that's where we'd see a reduction up to 50%. But again, that would be the year that this funding that we're getting from reclamation would try to mitigate for. So that's kind of where we're at in the conversations, and take questions, and then obviously can always go into more detail at some point in the future.
Thank you. And we understand how important this is. We appreciate hearing what you have to say. Are there any members of the public wishing to comment? Nope? All right, so I'll bring it back to the board. Any comments from the board?
I have a question that you started mentioning the Delta project. How does this affect the Delta project?
When you say the Delta project, are you talking about the
Gavin Newsom's dream.
what?
Gavin Newsom's dream to take our water away.
Oh, the tunnels?
Right.
Oh, well, that's a whole different problem. We're not even addressing that through any of this. This is really operations of Shasta, and then the Bay Delta plan is just more of a Delta outflow number. I think they're going to have to get permits for that project that are going to have to comply with those same requirements.
All right. But I'm assuming that if that project gets approved somehow, this is all going to be affected.
No.
It's not going to be affected.
No.
Can you
Nope.
explain why?
Well, we've said that our water that we're providing to these programs, like if we're providing 100,000 acre feet for in-stream flows and for Delta outflow, the tunnel project can't divert that. So they would have diversion criteria that would preclude them from diverting those flows when they're provided.
Okay, Josh has our last question.
You said that there was, originally they were asking for 600,000
I was
total acre feet?
If you look at, again, some of the modeling that we've done based on how they could implement it. So if you say we're 2 million acre feet of diversion, and they're saying, during those summer months, there'd be about a 30% reduction in our contract amount. 30% of 2 million is about 600,000 acre feet.
But you told them that the amount that you were countering back with was 100,000.
Yeah.
And was that accepted? Is that what is there? What's there?
Yeah, great question. So the board is currently evaluating our proposal collectively by the water users. So we submitted that proposal to them in April. They put out a staff report, so they went through and evaluated our proposal. There's a full staff report where they went through, modeled it and everything. They've identified some questions, issues that resolve, so we're actually preparing responses to them now. And so that's one alternative. And then they still have their unimpaired flow alternative that they're moving forward. And one of the things that on their unimpaired flow alternative that they haven't done is they've said, here's, again, this 55% unimpaired flow number, but they've never said how they would implement it. So you don't really know, well, what does that mean to us from a water supply standpoint? What does that mean to protecting cold water in Shasta Reservoir? We don't really know because all they've said is, well, we'll protect these things, but they haven't identified how. So they're going to come out with that implementation plan likely this fall, so we can also kind of look at our proposal and their proposal more side by side to see how close or where they differ.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I believe that's our questions for today. Thank you.
Question, sorry.
Oh, apologies. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay.
UC Davis has a question.
I have a question only because I am pretty new to this board, and so I'm just getting up to speed. So we are a part of the settlement contractors, and so I was just curious how this might be impacting us specifically, or if that's still to be determined, and then, yeah, I'll stop there.
Sure, I can answer that. The Woodland Davis Water Agency, basically our summer water right is a CVP water right. We use that during Term 91 curtailments, probably 9 out of 10 years in summer. It's our 10,000 acre-foot water right. We typically refer to it as that. So that is a Sac River Settlement Contract water right. That is subject to everything that was talking about. But it doesn't affect our primary water right, which we use in winter months.
Great, thank you, that was super helpful.
Yeah, so if you take like your 10,000 out of 2 million is kind of what your pro rata share is. So if you kind of just say that's the ratio, like you could take, 10,000 out of 2 million as part of that would be your proportion of 100,000, for example. That's the way to do it. We just as one approach. We're working on kind of the different approaches right now.
And how would our group be involved in that discussion about how it might impact us? Are we at the table at all, or?
Yeah, so we've put together pretty much all the managers of all the major water users. So Tim's part of the group, and so we're trying to do things as a group and make group decisions, and trying to make sure if there's trade-offs, trading, people want to do, to the extent we can kind of accommodate where everybody wants to come from, we're trying to do that. So we're right in the midst of those conversations now. Yep.
All right, I believe that's all the questions we have. Thank you again.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Appreciate your time. Okay, that takes us to item 4 on our agenda, which is the general manager's update and report. Is that you, Tim?
Hi, good afternoon. Next slide, please. I will try to be rather brief. So usual topics, water supply outlook, how it looks for the summer and fall, and then our usual capital improvements, operations, and distributed energy resources update. I have to say that one really slow because it's hard to say fast. But one thing I would like to mention, though, is we finally did get back from the Regional Water Quality Control Board in writing that we are exempted from the nitrate control program. We got exempted from the nitrate control program, which would have been where we had to prove that the agency is not contaminating groundwater with nitrates or have to pay for everybody else's water supply. We managed to get out of that by simply using logic and common sense, which is refreshing. Next slide, please. So this is the graph you're used to seeing. This is the Northern Sierra Precipitation Index. This is the 8 gauging stations on the Sacramento River. The top of the shaded area is the 30-year running average, and then the other years are each year in order. This current year is the dark blue line. As you can see on there, we're running at about 91% of average through today, or actually 2 days ago. So about 91% of average, so a little bit below average. However, snowpack this winter has been really good, so that being a little bit below average doesn't really seem to matter this year. Next slide, please. This is just the water year beginning October 1. So this is just this past winter starting in October 1. So it's the 8 gauging stations. That's just the precipitation that ended up in those 8 particular gauges.
Thank you.
How it affects the reservoir, though, is probably more getting to your question. This is Lake Oroville. The top of the shaded area is the long-term average. The solid dark blue line is the current year every day beginning October 1. And Lake Oroville is still basically at 100% full. It's been 100% full since right around late April and continues to be very close to that right now. Next slide, please. Looking at Lake Shasta, very similar. Same thing, top of the shaded area is the long-term average, and the solid dark blue line is this current year. Shasta didn't quite hit 100% full, but got very close and is still very full for this year. About 96%, yeah. So what's really good news about both of these reservoirs is that they'll generally follow the curve of the average. At the end of the year, both reservoirs will get into next winter with a pretty solid amount of carryover storage, which will really help us next year in case it's a dry winter. Next slide, please. Kind of moving more to how it affects us this summer. This is the Term 91 curtailment graph. The curtailment is currently not in effect. However, yesterday afternoon, we were notified that it will be starting very soon. The state likes to do this around 4:59 p.m. on Friday. So I think that's what they're going to do tomorrow. There is a daily graph that we can watch. We know what's going on, and it's been solidly in the Term 91 territory all week. This graph shows up a bit faded, but below the solid line, the light blue, is when there's sufficient natural flow, meaning no Term 91. When it's in the red on the top part of it, that means that they are releasing supplemental water from reservoirs in order to meet Delta water quality objectives, which means that could trigger Term 91. So that's been in the red every day this week, so it will likely happen tomorrow night. Next slide, please. So I kind of looked a little bit ahead on what does that mean for us this summer and fall. Because it is another fairly wet year, we do have access to our full 10,000 acre-feet of our CVP water right, which is the Sac River Settlement contract water right. Looked at how does this match with 2023 water demand, and then we also have a request from the city of Davis this year that they operate a bit higher than their 12 MGD capacity. So the way the agency is set up is the water treatment plant has a 30 MGD, 30 million gallon per day water capacity. Woodland owns 18 of that, and Davis and UC Davis together own 12. City of Davis has requested that they operate around 13.5 to 13.8 through the summer. So we looked at how does that affect water supply given Term 91 starting tomorrow night. The other factor is that the 10,000 acre-feet, Woodland owns 52.1% and Davis owns 47.9%. Don't ask me how we got such specific numbers, but that's what we have. Yeah. So we looked at how does this work. So given curtailment starting tomorrow night, it's mathematically impossible for Davis to obtain its 47.9% without running higher than 12. So they will run at about 13.5 all summer long. Woodland does not use its full 18 MGD and is not likely to this year. So Woodland can simply operate as they are right now on pressure and get 100% of the supply from the agency. It does require a little bit more foresight from the plant staff because they're going to have to manage not going over 30 MGD throughout the day using operational storage, which they can do. So both cities are working together with the water treatment plant, and I think this will all work out really well for us.
Okay, why did we ask for more? Did Stan or did somebody like what? Wait, is it just usage? Or are they
it's usage,
projects,
but there's also, I believe, an issue with one or more of the deep wells that the city is working on, and they would rather have a higher percentage of surface water this year if possible.
Okay, thanks.
But Stan should really speak to that, not so much me, but I think they're working on some wellhead treatment.
I was just curious. I didn't know if there was. Yeah, thank you.
Yep, and then we're also looking at working on a water transfer agreement for beginning November 1. This is more hopefully an insurance policy in case we get into late October and November and it's not raining and the curtailment continues into winter and we don't have access to our primary water supply. So we'll be working on that for later on this summer. Any questions on water supply before I move on? Capital improvements. So we do have a few projects going on. We got a really good picture of our beautiful new screens at the intake on the right-hand side. There are still 3 screen sections that we have not replaced. 7 were replaced a few months ago, or several months ago. 3 more remaining. We had to wait until the river level declined and also until RD 2035 went to their normal summer kind of minimum flows. So right now, the remaining 3 replacement is scheduled for the week of July 8th. We will have a biologist on site. It will not interrupt water flows to the agency or to RD 2035. All the screens that need to be replaced are in the same half of the intake. So we'll simply close that half down, shift pumping to the other half, and be able to do the work while we're fully in operation. The other item that we're working on is potentially replacing our meter at the intake. Right now we have 1 power meter at the intake that serves both RD 2035 side and the agency side. We spend several hours every month splitting the power bill, simply because it's kind of like a la carte pricing where there's several different rates and then even more back charges that we have to figure out who owns what. So the thought was maybe we get our own separate meter and stop having to split the power bill. The price came in a bit higher than we were expecting, so we're evaluating whether or not we actually want to do that, or just continue to ask Michelle to split the power bill for us. Next slide, please. A few more other capital improvements that we're working on at the intake, primarily erosion control project. This has been on our list for a few years now. RD 2035 is bidding that project for us. The thinking is it's better to have RD lead that rather than the agency, primarily because RD 2035 is the 80% owner and we're the 20. I'd rather that we write them a check for 20% of the cost versus have them write us a check for 80% of the cost. So working on bidding the project now to get it completed by the end of October. Another good thing we were able to do is our original permitting required that we, so it's an erosion control project, so we have some erosion south side of the intake. What we're going to do is placing large riprap, large rock to protect us from further erosion. One of the permit conditions was that we bury the rock with dirt. It took us about 2 years to explain to the agencies that this is an erosion control project and putting dirt on the rock will simply wash away into the river. They finally agreed, so we got that removed from the project. The other thing we're working on is, this has been brought up to the board before, safe roof access, that we need to be able to get onto the roof safely and looking at maybe bringing in a scissors lift instead to get up there. And then another thing we're working on is access for the screen cleaner. Maintenance, we don't really have a good way to access the screen cleaner mechanism in the river from over the edge of the structure itself, so we're working on a good plan for that. And there are a few relatively small projects at the water treatment plant that Jacobs will be leading, and that we fund that through our R&R fund, repair and replacement fund. But the plant is already starting its 9th year of operation. There are a few pieces of equipment that generally don't last all that long, so we're already starting to see the need to replace a few old things to keep the plant in continuous operation. Next slide, please. Moving on to operations update. So the month of May, we did start increasing flows. I think May was fairly cool, so we're about 20.5 million gallons per day on average. Woodland and Davis used about the same amount of water. UC Davis, a little over 1 million gallon per day. Metal drinking water requirements, everything's updated on this state's website, or this agency's website. And I saw 291 in Red State. And we're continuing to divert under our primary water right until probably 5 p.m. tomorrow. Next on operations is there are a couple of every 5 year things we need to do. We did kick off our next round of the AWIA Risk and Resilience Assessment and Emergency Response Plan update. This table is not updated. Basically, it's the same dates except 2025 because it's the second time around with it. You've probably all heard in the news recently, the FBI has been doing a lot of warnings recently on cybersecurity and other risks to water and wastewater utilities. That's something that this program helps us to be secure against. So it'll be our second take at these two documents. The other thing we're starting, and it's actually on the agenda today, is the Sacramento River Sanitary Survey. That's a 5-year update that we work on with our partners in the area. And then lastly, we're working on looking for qualified operations staff to help us with annual facilities investigations or inspections. That's on the agency side to do, and that's really to make sure that Jacobs is taking care of the plant from an operational perspective the way that we want. The person we had been working with retired, so now we're looking for someone else. Next slide, please. So the last slide on the update, distributed energy resources update. We did complete and submit the application to the Bureau of Reclamation for $400,000, and that's primarily for design and some additional grant applications. So currently working on 60% design and working with equipment vendors. Those kind of go hand in hand. We're working with the existing equipment we have on site, so that should work out pretty well. And then a couple more grant applications, another one for Bureau of Reclamation, and the other one will be with PG&E. And working out exactly how do we deliver this. We'll have to work together with Jacobs on that. There's different models that can be worked on with that. This is to help us deal with our power supply issues that we have at the plant. Next slide, please. I can take any questions that you may have.
Any member of the public have a question? And Heather, you got a question? No, other board members? All right, that completes that. That's the end of item 4, brings us to item 5, which is our fiscal year 24-25 budget. Just a little throwaway item, right?
Yes, just a minor item.
Right.
Next slide, please. So really,
It'd be good to focus on basically anything different this year from last year, okay?
sure, there's
Thank
a few things that are different this year than last year. It's the same two topics in our budget: operation and maintenance, and debt and reserve payments. Next slide, please. Overall, the budget proposed is 23.09 million, slightly higher than past couple of years. And there's there's the two categories. The biggest one by far is operation and maintenance. That's what we pay to treat and deliver drinking water. And then the rest of those other 4 categories are basically permits, legal, oversight. Debt and reserve payment does not change. That's the same payments that we have every year through the duration of the loans. Next slide, please. So kind of walking through real quickly the major categories. The O&M budget is $10.4 million. Of that, $5.2 million is the fixed and variable cost of treating and delivering water of the agency's facilities. The next biggest is the electricity and pass-through chemicals, about $3.5 million. One thing that's new is the $300,000 for the finished water pump station DER, planning and design. That's to help advance planning and design that if we are selected for the grants, we'll cover that cost. And then as a carryover one from last year, the joint intake erosion control project, $500,000. We were not able to build the project last year because of the wet year. The river stayed too high, too late in the year, and we were not able to actually do the work. So this year we can. The river's gone down a bit, so we can do it this year. Supplemental water purchase we included in there, and that's really to allow us to do a water transfer agreement on an option basis for winter months. Probably some money for the option, and then some budget to exercise that option should we need to. And then the usual extraordinary expenses, incentive payments are for Jacobs for certain activities. $250,000 in repair and replacement of some minor equipment over at the water plant, and then just various other permit fees, water rate fees, reporting requirements. We spend a lot on that these days. O&M budget, the O&M oversight is basically what the agency needs to do, primarily West Yo, on helping us meet all of our obligations. Permits and water supply, the biggest chunk of that is we did include budget for a supplemental EIR, and that's to support a long-term water transfer agreement, so we don't have to do these annual agreements anymore. Next slide, please. Agency administration, $700,000. That covers myself, Stan, and Michelle. Treasury, accounting services, legal. The biggest single thing in that is insurance. Insurance is right now estimated at about $304,000 for this year.
300 to 400.
304. It's gone up. It's about double what it was 4 or 5 years ago. And that's we have never had an insurance claim, but that's kind of where it is these days. So that's the biggest piece of the agency admin budget. Operation and contingency, that is something that's just a carryover year to year. We have not used it. We do not intend to use it, but it's good to have in case we need to use it at some point.
Now remind me, is that 304,000 with YC Parmia?
Yes, yeah,
Okay,
with
so-
YC Permia.
So we have a public, essentially, it's a JPA of its own.
Yes.
Thank you.
So under the last of the major budget categories is the debt and reserve payment. That's the same as it is every year. Woodland reserve payment is getting closer to getting done. I think we've got about 2 more years left, and that one can go away. But the other two will be on for quite a few more years yet. Next slide, please. So looking at O&M cost comparison, where we are with respect to our current budget year, and then how it relates to next budget year. Our current year budget is $21.56 million. We're expecting to end the year at about 20 million, so about $1.5 million under. Kind of some of the reasons for doing that, we did put in $500,000 for the joint intake repairs, which we did not do, so that will be done this next fiscal year. And then I think the other big thing is that Woodland actually underused its water supply because Woodland stopped injecting into the ASR wells back in March, simply because there wasn't a need to store more water. So we're actually a bit under target in terms of water use for their current fiscal year. Comparing to the next budget year, these two categories increase. Operation and maintenance increases by about $1 million. Permits and water supply about $400,000, and that's really where the difference comes in. Next slide, please. kind of walk through why these changes. So there's about $1 million increase in operations budget. One of the reasons is we're expecting rather unrestricted water treatment flows this year. We'll be able to operate the plant at a pretty high rate. So the main increases are increase in fixed costs and chemical costs, and that's primarily driven by inflation, and that we're able to use a higher amount of water than we could in the past. $250,000 for repair and replacement expenses of some equipment at the water plant, and then $500,000 for the joint intake erosion control project. We probably will underspend that one. If RD 2035 is managing the construction contract and we pay them 20%, we'll actually underspend that significantly. This budget was set up that we could do it either way. Either that we lead it, they pay us, or the other way around. But right now we're trying to get them to do it, and then we will just pay them 20% of the cost. One good thing for us is that electricity costs are down in our budget, and that's because we're switching to WAPA for a power supplier beginning January 1, which has a lower cost for electricity, so that's actually down a couple $100,000. And the rest of the agency budget is essentially unchanged, except for, next slide please, except for permits and water supply, and that's to allow budget for a supplemental EIR for long-term water transfer. Everything else is about the same. Next slide, please. So in total, the revenue sources, Woodland about $12.18 million, City of Davis 8.9, UC Davis 650, RD 2035 650, although that will change. That will go down quite a bit if they lead the erosion control project, can we pay them. And then the R&R fund is a fund actually that the agency has. This is money that we've been saving up for expected repair and replacement at the water plant. So it doesn't get charged to the partners. This is for planned replacement work. This number is a bit different than the agency budget because it does not include the contingency, which we just simply roll over year to year. Next slide, please. So really, I know I went through that kind of quickly in essence to save time. There are really two action items for the board, is to consider adoption of the 24-25 budget and approve the associated consultant task orders for various work items.
Tim, thank you. That was a real rapid review, but I know we've been through this before, except perhaps for Heather. So, any questions on our budget? Any member of the public have a question on our budget?
No public questions. I do want to clarify that the action items that are listed here are two separate agenda items, so when you're addressing them.
So, okay.
5 and 6.
So it's to consider the proposed budget for adoption. So that's one action, right? Do I have a motion to adopt the fiscal year 24-25 agency budget as proposed?
So moved.
Thank you, Director. Okay. Thank you, Josh, and thank you, Rich. Motion on the table for the discussion. There being none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? So the next item is, what is the next action item on this? Oh, thank you, that's all I wanted to check. It's approval of a consultant task order with West Yost and Associates, and the funds to pay this is in the budget we just adopted.
Yes, sir.
All right, and we've used West Yost for several years.
Yes, they've been the agency's engineer since 2009,
Right.
or maybe even before then.
All right. So rather than take a staff report on this, as this is a continuing relationship and contract that is properly budgeted for, are there questions from board members on this item? No member of the public has expressed interest on this? All right. May I have a motion, please, to adopt the action in item 6? Come on, Babu. Okay. Director Vatela moves the item,
I'll second.
and Director Chapman seconds. Further discussion? There being none, all in favor say aye, please.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carried. That takes us to item 8.
7.
Excuse me, item 7.
We're almost there.
Yeah. Adoption of resolution number 2403, which is authorizing the general manager to apply for, receive, and enter into a cooperative agreement and administer a grant in cooperation with the City of Woodland, U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, Water Smart, planning a project grant for distribution energy resources for integrations design. Something like that. You want to give us the very short kernel of explanation of what this is for?
Yes, this is the grant that we actually submitted the grant already to Bureau of Reclamation for the Water Smart grant for the Distributed Energy Resources Program, basically to fix our electrical issues at the water treatment plant. The city of Woodland technically applied for the grant because the city is listed in the Yolo County Hazard Mitigation Plan as needing assistance for water supply, but for whatever reason, the agency was left out of the hazard mitigation plan from the county. And the city has a grants.gov account, so the city could apply for it, the agency could not. But Reclamation likes a resolution from the governing body, which would be us, and Josh can add to it if we need to. We talked about whether or not the city of Woodland would need to do a resolution or the agency or both. I think we landed on the agency only.
We can't let Josh talk because it'll cost us.
Actually, I think it's both. I think
Okay.
the city's adopting one as well,
All right.
or has.
No, not yet.
Not yet, okay.
Why is it that we have to take an action to authorize this?
Well, as soon as we're selected for the grant, we'll need to execute the grant agreement. So we'll have our attorney review it and then execute the agreement.
And it's just it's a federal government requirement.
Got it.
The state generally requires them to.
Got it, no worries. Members of the board, do you have questions about this item? If not, is there a motion to approve the authorization for our general manager to take these actions? Thank you, Director. All right, motion and, okay. Director Landsberg made the motion, Director Vatela seconds the motion. All in favor, if no further discussion? All in favor, say aye. No member of the public? All right, motion carried. Thank you, thank you. Okay. And now, item 9, the all-important opportunity to have
8.
a really,
You're on 8.
number 8. See, I'm actually looking ahead and just flipping over here faster than I can move. Consider authorizing the general manager to sign the Sacramento River Watershed Sanitary Survey 2025 update MOU, and this is allowing us to cooperate with other partners who are all subject to the same survey, and it's all over the region, including Placer County, as I gathered from reading the staff report. Are there any questions on this item? All right, I don't think we need a staff report. Do you want to give one?
Not necessarily. This is the third time that we're participating in this agreement. City of Sacramento leads it for the agency, and it basically allows us to do the whole Sac River watershed update at about 18% of the cost of doing it alone. So it's a great partnership with our regional water utilities.
Thank you. Makes perfect sense. A motion, please? Motion by Director Vatela, second by Director Landsberg. All right, thank you. Oh, you made the motion? Okay, no, we'll go with Vatela and Landsberg.
Okay.
Further discussion on the item? Members of the public?
None.
No comments from them? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Now, item 9, it gives my opportunity to get out of this job and get a really competent chair for next year. And so in accordance with the organizing documents, we have a tradition of rotation, and so it's now turned for the City of Davis to take the chairmanship. So, and Woodland would be the vice chair, and so the chair is going to make a motion that we appoint Director Babu Vatela as the next chair and Director Rich Landsberg. And so I've made the motion. Josh seconds the motion. Further discussion? Any member of the public? No?
None.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. You know, I may make light of it, but the truth is, what we do here is serious. Did you not say aye? You didn't ask for that. All in favor say aye. All right. Josh was getting pretty excited over there, so and the clerk. I just want to say we do serious business here, but much of what we do is somewhat routine, so we move quickly through the more routine items. And we did put a fair amount of time into that initial item, frankly. So with that, I just want to say thank you to everybody. Again, we do serious business. We are very well managed, in my opinion. We're several years down the road now, and it's pretty impressive what we've accomplished as an agency. I want to thank our staff because you're the people who really make all this happen. All right? Any concluding comments from colleagues? Well, there is a 10 item.
Yeah. Item 10.
Yeah, item 10 is the long-range board calendar. You know, I personally think this ought to be organized differently. The long-range calendar should be part of the general manager's report, just as a matter of opinion.
We can do that.
Okay, anybody have a question or comment on anything on the long-range calendar?
Yep, there's not much on there. The next board meeting is September 19 in Davis.
Well, we'll have to cancel the meeting. No, we'll probably have the meeting, Rich. It happens. All right, so thank you again. We are adjourning today to September 19 in Davis at 3 o'clock, and we'll look forward to seeing everyone there with Chair Baitla. All right, and thank you all for coming.
If you want to return those packets to me, you don't want them, I will shred them or do whatever.
Thank you.